Public school, private school, charter school. I'm going to talk to you about these three things, and let me preface by saying this is only from my viewpoint. This is only from the perspective of the community where we live, so it could be different in other places. So just have that in mind up front. But I have the unique perspective of having taught in all three environments. So I'm very familiar with what really goes on versus what they tell parents goes on, for lack of a better description. And so I thought I would give you a little bit of this background information. So most of us are familiar with the public school sector, right? That's how I went through school. That was what I taught in for many, many years. And the difference between public and charter school, that's where it's kind of confusing for parents. And so I do want to explain that because I didn't fully understand it until I really taught in it. Between the two, the class sizes are going to be the same. In the charter schools, some interesting things about them. Now, they can be very well run and they can have great teachers. However, a lot of the ways that I found that some charter companies work is that they build the schools, you might notice, with smaller classrooms and more office-based furniture. And that is because when they build them, they get a huge tax break because they're labeling it as a school for the property in the building. And it actually benefits them for the school to fail, because then they turn around and they can sell it to another company, like a law office, for instance, and make a huge profit. So that is an interesting business dynamic. It's not like that for every charter school, but that is kind of a prevailing thing that happens. Also, I noticed that they tend to use programs that the district has already moved past, and so they're using older material. Or if they do use the same material, many times they did not adopt the entire program. So it was like a limited amount of the program that the teachers had access to. What I found is the main difference, honestly, is that your child wears a uniform in a charter school. Otherwise, they are still doing public school curriculum. They're learning in the public school format. It is essentially the same. And some parents seem to think it's more like private school based, but it is not. So public school has to follow the state mandates for curriculum, and the charter school does as well. And those are basically like the only differences between the two. And I think most of us are pretty familiar with how public school is. You know, the downsides are every child gets to go regardless of behavior. So your child is potentially in a room with students that are violent, that are extremely disruptive, and the teacher has no choice but to deal with that within the classroom to the best of their ability, which sometimes is next to impossible depending on the situation. But that is public school. It is free education, and that's the way it goes. And so those students still have the same rights, and they still get to come even if they are completely disrupting the environment every single day. Private school obviously costs, and so you have to have the ability to pay for it. And I know more and more states are doing scholarships so that you have options, and that is something to look at. Private schools typically have smaller class sizes. Do not be brought in by the fact that it's going to be academically more rigorous. I will say, like in our particular district, as a public school teacher, we knew that the majority of all the private schools, when we would get a student into our classroom, we would kind of roll our eyes, because every single time the parent came in thinking that their child was advanced, because that's what the private school had told them, and we would test them and they would be substantially deficient. Private schools are not required to follow the state mandates. So it is pretty vital that you make sure that they actually do, or their curriculum very much may be substandard, but they are obviously going to promote themselves as being advanced because they need to draw in students. So you do have to really look at that. My daughter now goes to a private school, and it is one that follows the state standards, and it is not academically advanced. What we are getting is the environment. So the environment at a private school is very different. Many times it is more Christian based. So she attends chapel almost every morning with a chaplain that has a very obvious relationship with God. and does great, they call them homilies, you know, some religions call them sermons, but just great Bible-based teaching. And they're singing hymns that we grew up with, and they're getting that daily dose. They sing the Lord's Prayer every morning to a song. So you have little bitty kids who have already memorized the Lord's Prayer because it's to music, and you're getting that foundation if that is something that's important to you. Obviously, they're wearing uniforms, so that levels the playing field a little bit, but there are still nuances that kids do with uniforms. And it is a smaller environment, smaller class sizes. Here's a big, huge one, though, that I found as a teacher. And this is something that if you're a teacher right now and you're stressed out in public school, it is a night and day difference as a teacher in a private school. You actually just get to walk in and teach like what you originally wanted to do, and you are not plagued by the endless inundation of paperwork that I know you are in public school. It is so much easier, so much easier. And yes, there's usually a pay cut involved, but if you can handle a little bit less, I am telling you, your quality of life will be so much better. It is so different for the teachers. So then you have to understand that trickles down to the students too, because the teachers are not as overwhelmed and as, you know, just like a complete environment that is beyond someone's capability to handle because of the level of paperwork that public school has involved at this point. You also are not dealing with the same level of behavior problems, because when a student is extremely disruptive, the private school can send them out, whereas public school, you have to leave them there. So those are just some differences that we have been a part of. And at the high school level, because it's smaller, the teachers are all intimately acquainted with all the students still. That does not happen in a public high school. Particularly if it's large. Those teachers are seeing so many students that unless your child stands out for a particular reason to that teacher, many of them are just going to fall through the cracks. So those are things to consider when you're looking at it. Like I said, this is just our perspective in our area of what we've gotten to see. But as a teacher, I had that kind of inside information, because what's publicized at schools to parents is lots of times not that accurate. And if you're just asking other parents, they don't have any more information than you do, really. So I just wanted to give you that background. When you're looking at those different choices, it's a hard choice to make. And then of course your fourth choice is homeschool. And that has great pros and cons as well. I did homeschool for 2 years too, one of my daughters. So there were things that we loved about it and things that she missed being with peers. I know a lot of people say that, you know, it's fine and you can give them as much socialization, but it was more of a limited thing, even though I worked very hard for her to have that socialization. She felt the difference, having been in school before. She noticed. And so there are pros and cons for all four situations. But I just wanted to give you this very long video of the information that I had and my experiences with them. Have a great day.